Well, I'd like to cover the fact that this Smithsonian Museum has been reported in this new report as being ideologically captured, which I think is actually a pretty nice phrase.
Yeah, it's
there.
Great. I really like the phrasing of that, and it's certainly not news, at least to me. I think it might not be news to many people, but it's a sign of what's happened to so many institutions. We've talked about the universities, about obviously there's heavy politicization going on. I think people don't think enough about the politicization of these public service sort of facilities and programs and institutions, the public libraries that host these drag queen story hours and such nonsense, and promote these books that are really aimed more or less at grooming kids into horrible ideologies or worse. And it's also a problem with these museums. This is the National Museum of American History. You would think it's pretty straightforward. Well, here, let's present American history. But no, there's an ideology at work here, and some of the examples are pretty amazing.
Yeah, I agree with you in regards to not paying enough attention to these public institutions. I would say that this is sort of, broadly speaking, part of academia.
Yeah.
And it is all of that has been kind of taken over, so that people don't know their own history, because instead it's all about, oppression.
Yes.
As opposed to really the great American story. And that has an impact, especially on young people who've never been exposed to a counter argument from a position of authority, right? They've never had somebody who actually told them the truth, who was in a position that they should be able to trust, because all the institutions at this point have embraced a sort of class warfare theory, sort of Marxism, that now seeks to misinform them and to make them essentially ashamed of who they are and where they have been in a sort of collective way. So there's something that's really tragic and harmful about that.
Yeah.
It's harmful, and that's the whole reason that communist regimes so often want to call for so-called year zero, right? Like, let's completely start over and have nothing that went before, because because if you do that, if you start up with a year zero with no alliances to the past, it's a lot easier to form people, to get them to do your bidding if they don't feel like they have any loyalty to anyone who came before them.
Yep, trying to make people into a blank slate. And you said class warfare. There's also a racial or ethnic warfare aspect to this.
Yeah.
And of course the sexual degeneracy aspect of it, the LGBTQ agenda. And that's why I love this phrase that someone on Twitter, a pundit on Twitter, came up with some time ago. Gay race communism is what he phrased it as this is basically the summary of this ideology. And that's basically what's on display here. And particularly in matters of social justice, the museum's director, Anthea Hartig, and some of the comments she's made in past as leader of this museum, again, the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. In 2020, in the wake of the Summer of Love, all those mostly peaceful protests, Hartig said, "We work to reframe the traditional celebratory narrative of U.S. history for visitors." So basically, let's make you hate the U.S. when you come here. This Museum of American History, let's make you hate the U.S. And then the following year, she spoke to the University of California, Riverside, and described how she believes the museum profession has, quote, to figure out how we're going to problematize the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 2026, and that loving America is very complicated, unquote. That's what the report says. And the summary here is that our central finding is not that the museum has simply added overlooked stories, corrected perceived errors, or broadened its historical scope. Rather, it is that the museum leadership has explicitly adopted an ideological framework that no longer treats the American story as a shared national inheritance to be taught or celebrated, but as a political instrument to divide, dispirit, and discourage our citizens. That about sums it up, and that I think can apply to far more than just this one museum.
Right, and the report, though, it shows how, as they call it, undocumented organizing materials were integrated in these exhibits throughout the museum. And so you have stuff that's aimed at, like, quote, darker wings, with the phrases, here to fight, and undocumented and unafraid. Yeah. Here's the thing. If you're undocumented, to use their phrase, you're not American. and this isn't even like a question.
Yeah.
So why are you in a museum about American history? You know what I mean?
Yes.
You're literally the very opposite of the point of the museum. Like,
Yes.
you can go into some immigration thing, whatever, and have your say, have your fight, but you have nothing to do with American history right here. That's sort of like the American conflict at present,
Yes.
which is not American history. So really, it's like this is a museum the Smithsonian is funded by tax dollars.
Yeah.
It's funded. You've already paid for it. That's why it's free to get in. And yet it is being used as something to try and make Americans feel bad about everything that is American fundamentally. And there's something. I mean, it is tragic. It is harmful for like going forward. I mean, there's lots of stuff that's like Pride Month adjacent as well, because it's really like a massive ideological project that it's become that is. Contrary to, I'm just going to say, the American founding ideals, because you certainly wouldn't have had, Pride Month behaviors there when you had the founders debating over whether the death penalty was appropriate or not. If you want to like look at it in the context of actual American history.
Yes.
But instead it's like, no, what kind of ideological framing do we want to create such that we can create an America that is very different from what it currently is? So instead, it really is this sort of indoctrination program. And we mentioned class warfare for a second there. I just wanted to clarify. There were some, I guess you could call them philosophers if you want to use the term broadly, but who looked at the system of America and said, well, we can't really use the sort of classic Marxist class warfare in America because America has so much wealth mobility. America has more wealth mobility than any country in the history of the world. If you grow up poor, it is possible for you to simply rise, to go to a public school that is fully funded, to actually graduate from that, and then to actually get a good job. This has always been the case, that America has that tremendous wealth mobility. Those who are in the top 1%, most of the time did not actually come from a generation who did. So you have to go, okay, well, what are we going to do to divide the populace? And this is where sort of you have the cultural Marxism that comes in, that uses the sort of same conflict theory, but applies them to these different classes, these different groups, these different victimhood classes. So no longer is it just those who are poor on the spectrum, those who have not, that are the oppressed, but simply these groups that can never get out of their status of being oppressed, i.e. because they're black or whatever it happens to be.
These groups that tend to maintain, continue their minority status even when they're the majority in a group or in an area.
Exactly.
They're still the minority. And this reminds me actually, so this is going to take it to a slightly different tangent, but the fact that, as you mentioned, this is taxpayer funded, that this is the national, it's a national museum. And by the way, you talked about the Pride Month acknowledgments, the Pride Month celebrations that they provided. They didn't offer any July 4th only programming for Independence Day. They did not put any special focus on the actual 250th anniversary of the nation. Exactly. And so the problem with this being this national museum that has been ideologically captured, well, a big part of that is because no one with the opposite opinions has either managed to maintain a job there or has applied at all. And this kind of goes into it's sort of a counter narrative that I want to keep promoting. And there seems to me to be a tendency among conservatives to say, well, if you're going to go to college, you need to get a useful degree. And you need to be in a useful profession, a properly money-making profession. You don't want to be one of these academics. You don't want to be one of these government workers in this sense. You don't want to be working in the arts. That's a useless liberal profession in that way. There tends to be at least an implicit suggestion of that, an implicit sentiment
sometimes
there.
Explicit.
Sometimes explicit sentiment. And the problem is then you're giving up all of that ground to these ideological warriors that take over. That is the problem here, is that if you don't have explicit guidelines in place saying this needs to stay objective, this needs to stay conservative, certainly in the sense of conserving history and understanding it properly and conserving patriotism and a good, healthy respect for your country. if you're not going to explicitly enforce that in some way, and if you don't have people in positions of power and influence to help enforce that, then you're going to get taken over. Then your institutions are going to be ideologically captured. And that's what we've seen. I mean, we've seen it reach the highest levels of pretty much every institution under the sun. We've even seen it in the church, where certain people with very heterodox, certainly intentions, even if they don't say it explicitly outright, their actions often show what they want to do. And we've had that even in the church, which has these sort of guide rails, these guidelines, these rules that can help enforce order as long as you enforce them. In these places like the Smithsonian National Museum, if it's not explicitly saying that you have to defend American history in a proper context, it's just going to get taken over. And if you don't have anyone working there who is going to promote the proper understanding of appreciating America, patriotism, American history, then it is just going to roll over and become a tool for this ideological warfare, this gay race communism, basically, against the American people and Western civilization. So that's the problem with that narrative of, okay, well, go get a job in economics and become, a stock market trader or something like that. Well, not everyone is cut out to do that. Or the opposite effect happens, where it says, oh, don't go to college at all because they've been ideologically infiltrated, and just go into the trades or something. And then, okay, well, how are you going to influence something like this museum if you're just working in the trades? So these exaggerated sort of ways to cope with the ongoing capture of the institutions is really just giving up more ground.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be some discernment that takes place, because it kind of depends on what the individual has a proclivity towards, and This is part of just prudence. But that also goes between, okay, you can actually choose Catholic colleges as well. You can choose there are even Orthodox online colleges that aren't that expensive as well. These are actually options for you to look into. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we should just simply cede the ground, which is what we have been doing. It's what the politically conservative, but not necessarily Catholic, audience has been doing for quite a long time. You often hear amongst conservative pundits who are well-intentioned, but are actually, I think, doing cultural damage, will say things like, well, just don't go to college, especially don't go to a liberal arts college. And it's because they have a misunderstanding of what a liberal arts college is or should be, because a lot of the liberal arts colleges, are, in fact, very leftist, very woke, and will try to, move you away from your faith, and it'll be a constant battle. So, no, I'm not saying go to those, but would you be in a good place to go to an actual Orthodox liberal arts college, which aims to be a true university, which is to lead you towards the one? That's what universitome means.
If you have the backbone to survive a less explicitly conservative or Catholic college, and you can actually survive in an Ivy League school, in a little Ivy, in any of these more prestigious universities that do have a lot of danger there. If you can trust yourself to survive there and keep your own beliefs solid, and you get through there, then you've got a degree from there. You don't have to, let's call it, reveal your power levels right away. You can, if you have the prudence, the wisdom to do this, you can get through your college, get your degree, get into a position of influence, and then start to work there. That's how these places got taken over from the beginning. That's how these places got taken over by these ideologues, is that they found a friend in a high place, or they worked their way up while keeping their ideology on the down low, and then eventually they were able to make a bigger difference for their side. We have to be as smart as that to be able to take back any of this. And I think a lot of people out there, I think a lot of young kids out there are smart, but they need the help and support and encouragement of those who have resources to support them, have the influence to support them. That's the thing that needs to be focused on.
And it would also just, I know we spent a lot of time on this topic already, but so many of our arts are there to actually fuel the soul. And, there's something wrong with a political movement, including one that's conservative. So in certain sense, the ideology is mostly right, but there's something wrong with it if we're moving away from the things that actually help us to serve God and to sort of see Him on this side of the grave. Because think of the massive, beautiful cathedrals. Who built them? Who designed them? It's people with an incredible vision, much greater than mine. I could never come up with something like that. But somebody with an actual artistic mind is actually instrumental in this kind of thing, and they have to actually have the education to go forward in order to build, in order to not just necessarily cathedrals, but to actually produce various different art that really does move us towards God. And we don't want to abandon all of those different fields for multiple overlapping reasons.